Hi, welcome to the Interaxis YouTube channel, interaxis.io. Today we're going to talk about something that's a big topic here for 2020, and that's DAOs. DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Soon, actually, we will actually have decentralized autonomous companies or corporations or whatever they might be. But the key here is decentralized and autonomous. So what does that mean? Well, back several years ago on the Ethereum blockchain, there was something that was just called the DAO, right? And this is kind of a sticking point or a bad point in the history of DAOs, as it was really the first one. And the DAO was basically a software code, right? And it was where you could lock in, it was smart contracts, you could lock in your ETH, and it would kind of manage it for you. But the problem was there was a little bit of a flaw in the coding of the DAO, and someone exposed that flaw and was able to get in there and start actually sending ETH to probably their own wallet, right? And it was able to leave the DAO, so the smart contract, and able to go into their own wallet. They were basically able to steal other people's ETH. Now, some people call it the DAO hack. In all technicality, it wasn't actually a hack. It was just a flaw in the code that someone exploited. There's a difference. It wasn't like someone nefariously went in and started attacking it. They just said, okay, there's a flaw. I can get in here and actually send ETH to myself. And the decentralized or the nature of blockchain says that once that happens, it's immutable and it can't go back. And the anonymity of blockchain means that we don't really know where that ETH ended up. So a lot of people lost some of their ETH in the DAO. They call it the DAO hack. Again, it's not really a hack. It was just an exposed flaw. They closed up the flaw, and that was when actually there was a branch when Ethereum, the Ethereum developers, many of them decided, including Vitalik himself, decided to fork the chain and actually roll back the Ethereum blockchain to before the DAO hack, and then keep going from that perspective, or from that point forward. Well, several of the developers said, no. The whole point of blockchain is it should be completely immutable. So even though there was this flaw that we all didn't catch and someone exploited it, we should keep going with the code exactly the way it is and not roll it back and fork it. So what you have at the point of the DAO hack is a lot of the Ethereum developers decided to, if the hack happened at this point in time, they decided, okay, again, including Vitalik, we're going to roll back the blockchain to this point, and we're going to say from this point forward, this is now the Ethereum blockchain. And all blocks going forward are going to point back to this point before the hack, and we're going to pretend this didn't happen. In the hardcore or the a lot of the people said, no. Ethereum, any blockchain should be completely immutable. We can't decide to roll it back. That's the whole point, because once we do it once, it's a slippery slope. We can kind of decide to do it again. And they said, no, we're going to keep going with this code the way it is. And this became Ethereum Classic. So now they're essentially two separate chains. Everything before here is the same, but from this point forward, Ethereum Classic includes this hack. Ethereum does not. So anyway, a point of contention between the Ethereum community and the Ethereum Classic community. Ethereum has actually gone on to be much bigger, more developer-based and everything. But that is the DAO. So if anyone were to go Google DAO, and you'd see something really bad about the hack, and maybe it's not safe and everything, but that really doesn't have any bearing. I just wanted to point that out because it's important to note what that was. So what a DAO, a Decentralized Autonomous Organization, essentially is a way is kind of a new way to set up a group of people that want to kind of do something together. I can't really think of a better way to describe it than just imagine a group of people that want to do something together. So a DAO could be as big as essentially kind of a company or an organization that says, we're going to pool, let's say we're going to pool $100,000 in a foundation, and we're going to decide how to deploy that money among different charities. Okay, now there could be a head of the foundation. I'm talking in terms without the DAO, just regular. There could be a head of the foundation, there could be a family, there could be a few people, a CEO and all that, and they can make these decisions, and they can have a board, and the board has to come together and vote. And this is how companies or organizations traditionally work, right? You have a potentially a board of directors that can vote, and they have below them the CEO and the president and the vice presidents and everything that essentially run the company. And then the board of directors gets to vote on kind of overarching principles and everything. So let's say you had $100,000 in a foundation, and you have to have all these different layers, these people to employ and pay. Well, what you can do with a DAO is you can say, all right, we're going to lock this into some sort of smart contract, and we're going to issue tokens to the DAO members. So tokens go to the DAO members. And then this DAO it's decentralized. There's not one person necessarily in charge or one group of people necessarily in charge. It ideally is all the members, but within this you can really encode the contracts. Here's what you want to be able to happen within this DAO. Here's how we want our organization, our foundation, our company to function. And therefore we're going to encode all that. We're going to encode in here how you put up a proposal for a vote, what the voting looks like, how many people have to vote, and how many have to vote yes or how many have to vote no, and then what the rules are to take any of those proposals and put them into practice. Right. So it's a way to kind of decentralize and not have one person or one small group of people necessarily really in charge of what happens. A lot of times this is what happens with the money. That's where a lot of the issues are. What happens with the treasury of the foundation of the company or the organization. In terms of how companies operate and everything, there's usually not that much pushback on that. The pushback usually comes with how are we going to spend our money? Right, so that's where DAOs have really come along and said, you know what, if we have 1,000 people as part of this foundation, we should have each one of those 1,000 people have some tokens, and maybe they have a few more tokens if they donated more money. But within here, there are rules that say, okay, we're going to vote one vote per month, and everyone in the foundation can put up here's let's say a charity that I want to vote for that I like, and there are rules that say you put up your proposal to this certain website by a certain date, and here's the form, right? So it has a form, goes to this site, and then everyone who has a token at a certain point maybe signs in, and they can use their MetaMask wallet or some other wallet that shows that I have this DAO token and I can now vote, and my vote is recorded. Now, the key is, again, since this is blockchain, it's decentralized, you might not even know that this particular token is me. You might not know that a token that's voting is Adam, right? Which you potentially can have some privacy or some anonymity to it. But the key is, and the votes are all counted, and everyone has agreed by virtue of the fact that they're a member of this DAO that whatever the vote is, that's essentially what we're going to go with. We're not going to challenge it or anything. We've all agreed these are the rules. And that's really important because you don't want later for someone to centralize this and kind of take over control, because that's the whole purpose of it, right? You want a decentralized autonomous organization. Here are the rules, and here's how it's going to operate. So some really important DAOs right now, for instance, Maker DAO. Maker is a really important DAO right now, because Maker DAO is the organization that creates DAI, the DAI stablecoin, and Psi, which is the Ethereum-backed stablecoin, and then DAI, which is multi-collateral backed stablecoin. So the Maker DAO Foundation, Maker DAO, is essentially has the code that gives the incentive for people to actually put their ETH or their other collaterals into these smart contracts, and it has the algorithms that kick out, all right, here's the incentive that people need to have in terms of the interest rate they receive by providing this liquidity, and here's the amount of DAI they will get back out. And it's always watching the numbers and making sure that the DAI is essentially stays worth $1, right? So that DAO is very important because there's no one person who can pull the trigger and start changing up the algorithm. They have to put things out for a vote, and several people, if you own maker tokens, you can go in and vote on what happens on proposals within the maker organization or within the DAO, within the code, and they basically said, we're going to go with how the community votes, and hopefully the community vote is better than having one or two people centralized, because those people might have some other needs or some other things pulling at them that they might be biased in some way. So this is a way to kind of potentially take out some biases. So it's really important because you might go, okay, how different is a DAO than just having like a board of directors that votes, or a board of advisors, or just a company that is kind of distributed? Well, it's important because what you've done is you've said, okay, we're going to put the code in here, and what we're going to say is we're not going to go against the code. We're not going to go against the way we've structured this organization in terms of how we vote and how we go about our business, right? It's all set in here, and even if we want to go back and change how we do business, we still have to vote on that. So no one person or one small group of people can go make these overarching changes to the organization without a community vote. So that's a really important part of DAOs to note. Where I see them, or where we see them actually being important, is they can kind of upset or disrupt a few industries, right? One that we're seeing is kind of the venture capital industry a little bit. And the reason is because you can, with a DAO, you can have a more decentralized and a more distributed organization. So you can have individuals all over the world that can collaborate more easily, and they can collaborate because they feel like they can have a vote, right? They have these DAO tokens and they can have a vote. And they might have a vote. They might not have put up any capital necessarily themselves, but there might be capital within the DAO, and they say, we're going to decide how this venture capital gets distributed. And because they're distributed all over the world, and they're distributed in terms of their skill sets and their understanding, their experience, and their knowledge, they can really get down and maybe invest in some companies early on. There's not a hierarchical structure of a venture capitalist. Venture capitalists, as they've come to be known and utilized in the U.S. and all over the world, they've just naturally developed this structure because so many people are going to them for money. Well, a venture capital kind of DAO can actually be distributed across the world. It can be people that, maybe they don't have a lot of experience in the venture capital world, but they understand a certain technology or a certain niche market or something, and they can really get in there and go, I see where this particular company is going to do really well, and I'm going to create a proposal for why we should, as the venture capital DAO, fund this company. And because of that, maybe you can fund that company at a much earlier stage than a true venture capitalist or a true angel investor. And you can understand it so much better and help that company so much more. And because of that, maybe you fund it with, only $10,000 or $20,000, but that might get that company really far in their development and in their launch, and in growing their organization, especially because a lot of the fintech companies, the blockchain companies, the crypto companies that we're seeing are all over the world also. So they might be operating in a country with a very very low costs, right? They can have their developers there. They might have their developers or their team distributed all over the world, right? So they might have a very low cost to develop an MVP or develop a next round of their product. And therefore, any capital, any venture capital, any seed funding they get can be at a very early stage and can really impact them. And they can get that because they can get to the members of this DAO. And I say this because there's Metacartel, which is a DAO that has kind of attacked this, where Metacartel has given out a few grants, but now Metacartel has formed Venture DAO. And Venture DAO is trying to do this exact thing. Now, Venture DAO is actually has an LLC here in the United States, and they have to be accredited investors and everything. So they are going through those rules, but Venture DAO is going to have all the same, DAO components of metacartel, which says we're going to vote. There's a process to this, and no one person really has autonomy over it all. No one person can veto it all, right? So we're really going to vote, and we're really going to take our tokens and vote, and those tokens might eventually have some value. Other DAOs, or there's other DAO structures that are created. So Aragon is a really important one, because DAOs don't necessarily just have to be business related. DAOs are in the contracts within them are really about governance. How do you organize your governance? And so DAO contracts take that governance and put it in code and say, all right, once this is encoded, now we decide, how do you get member tokens? How do you vote? All that can be encoded. It's somewhat like here in the U.S., right? We have the U.S. Constitution, and all other laws and all other rules spring from the Constitution, right? And everything else we do has to go back to, is this constitutional? And if some law that a state puts in, or some law that the federal government puts in, or a small municipality or whatever, it all has to go all the way back, and you go, is this constitutional? That's kind of what DAO contracts are, is they're creating this constitution. Here's how we're going to operate this organization. So Aragon is one that has created this series of contracts, and then, for instance, Melon Protocol, which is a fund management protocol based in Switzerland, uses the Aragon DAO contracts to kind of govern any of the fund management. Any fund managers that come in and use the Melon Protocol are also using Aragon for their own kind of DAO. Moloch DAO is another one. Moloch contracts are used with Metacartel and soon to be with Venture DAO and with their own Moloch DAO. And you can kind of reuse those contracts, right? They're open source. You can go use them and say, okay, this is how we're going to set up. We have to make a few tweaks to it, but that's what we're doing. Colony is another one. There's one called Colony. And where I see this going is venture capital is one. I see this happening with things like joint ventures, right? So if several organizations get together on a joint venture, I see this in the realm of, like, say, construction, right? So if there's a general contractor and several organizations are getting together to build something, the DAO might take the place of a general contractor, right? And people might be able to get together and vote on how you can construct or build something. They might be able to vote on how a certain joint venture works, how they utilize their finances. That's a big one. How are we going to utilize our finances? How are we going to spend our money? And the DAO contracts might say, okay, anything under $1,000, under $10,000, we don't need to vote, but anything above that, we need to vote on it. And maybe you go, well, that can slow down the process, but it also makes it to where you take out some of that centralization. You don't have someone who can direct the company a certain way that they want it to go. So DAOs, to me, are going to be extremely important as a way that distributed and decentralized teams can get together and govern themselves and govern how the organization continues to go and grow, because they can bring in other members to the DAO at times, bring them in, and those members can later leave, and they can all vote on what happens without having to create this overarching this structure of people and this hierarchical structure that says, here's the person we go to make the ultimate decision. So you're going to be able to form a DAO really quickly. An interesting use case of DAOs was at DevCon 5, so I hear, DAOs kind of created, people put some money in and they planned some parties. They planned some get-togethers and meetups in Japan during DevCon. That's a great use of DAOs, because you can get together and some people can do some work, finding the location. Some people can work on budgets, and everyone can kind of have their job, and then they get together and vote on what they're going to do. And you have a way where you don't have a bunch of emails necessarily going back and forth. You have a central repository where you can look at everyone's ideas and look at the budget, look at the spending. Here's how much we have left. Here's how much we're already spending. And they created these, from what I hear, pretty epic parties. So that to me could happen quite a bit. We got in the U.S. we have the Super Bowl coming up soon. That would be pretty epic to create a Super Bowl party DAO and figure out where you're going to have these awesome parties in whatever the Super Bowl city is. So I see a lot of uses for something like DAOs. It won't necessarily be, I don't think, multi-billion-dollar companies or anything like that, but I could see it with foundations, with charitable giving. We've already actually seen that some with DAOs donating some money to Australia. I could see it with joint ventures, obviously with venture capital, especially when you have distributed teams and when you have money involved. When the main point is we have a bunch of money and we have to figure out how to distribute it, a DAO is really a great way to go, and they're going to be very popular starting in 2020 and even beyond. Eventually, I think DAOs will kind of go towards centralization because that's just what happens, right? Someone's going to buy a DAO and they're essentially going to own it. But the DAO members will, of course, have to vote on that. Anyway, it's a concept that we've been wanting to talk about for a while. It's not a really easy one to grasp, but think of it in terms of setting the rules, setting the constitution. Here's how we're going to go. And the DAO, there are different companies creating different types of DAO contracts. Again, Aragon is one, Moloch is one, Colony is one, and you can create your kind of your organization and then create your voting rules and your proposal rules and your spending rules and everything. So DAOs are going to be really important in 2020. Keep up to date with them. When you start to see, DAOs being launched and you wonder, maybe you come back to this video, maybe you can read it a little more, maybe you send us a question or something and we'll talk about it. And I will go into in other videos certain DAOs like Aragon and Moloch and everything, but I wanted to talk about DAOs overall here. Again, hope you like the videos, hope you subscribe to the channel. Our new website's about to launch. We're doing some training courses soon. Hope you enjoy those. Info@interaxis.io is our website. Twitter @interaxis8, the number 8. We hope to see you soon.